Shenmue is sort of a cultural moment. Its reputation precedes it in a way, so it can be easy to overlook what the game itself is actually like. If you bring Shenmue up in conversation, people will generally know it as one of two things. Either they're gonna say it was the hyper-expensive project that nearly bankrupted Sega and doomed the Dreamcast, or they'll say it's the funny game where the dude is always like,
"Well, hello there. Do you know anyone from China? Do you know any place where sailors hang out? Do you know any company taking on new workers?"
But underneath the countless memes and the many stories of overwrought development, there is still a game. And I think there's value in taking a look at that, completely removed from context, and just saying, what is this game? Is it good? Does it hold up? Well, let's find out together. We start things off here on a dramatic note, with our boy Ryo Hazuki running home in the rain. Then one of the most famous scenes in gaming as the doors to the dojo burst open and we see Ryo's dad locked in a brutal fight with the series' big bad, Lan Di. After some brawling and cryptic dialogue, Lan Di beats up Ryo, kills his dad, and strolls out of there with a mysterious artifact that will become relevant much later. Ryo swears vengeance against Lan Di and decides to use his detective skills to track him down. It's a really simple plot, inspired by martial arts revenge type films of the 70s and 80s, but it works perfectly well to set us up with a straightforward, relatable goal: find the man who killed our dad and bring him to justice. One of the most interesting things about Shenmue is how it approaches this story. Needless to say, the opening cutscene sets a really grim, heavy tone, and of course we get the impression that Ryo will be doing a lot of ass kicking as a result of it. However, things don't really shake out quite that way, at least not at first. And not for a while. In fact, you'll likely be several hours into the game before you even have your first combat encounter. And as is common knowledge by now, even by the end of the game, Ryo is nowhere near to catching up with Lan Di. So, if we don't get a revenge, and nor do we do much fighting in the first two discs, what exactly fills the 20-some hours playtime of this game? Well... That's right, Ryo Hazuki shares my main hobbies of buying stuff from vending machines, vibing in the arcade, and looking at low poly objects. If you like comfy cozy feels, then this is definitely a game for you, which seems like a weird thing to say considering I just told you it starts off with Ryo's dad getting murdered, but there we go. The areas here are just big enough that you really do feel like you're strolling around through distinct districts with their own individual vibes, but equally they're all small enough to feel intimate and personal, at least after a while. The first time I ever played this game, I must have spent at least an hour just in Ryo's room, looking through drawers, wardrobes, cupboards, picking up random items and examining them, sometimes getting insightful comments from the man himself. It's the presence of a Sega Saturn in the living room cupboard, the Virtua Fighter poster in Fuxan's room, the milk in the fridge that you can feed to the little kitten that you sort of adopt. Shenmue drip feeds its locations out over the course of its several discs, which I do like as a pacing thing, because it encourages you to fully explore the space that you do have available to you and engage with all the activities in one place before moving on. I can't go to the big shopping street with the cool arcade straight away, but I do get the Abe store with its little gacha machines, so I can spend all the allowance Ine-san gives me on plastic tat. And just like me, Ryo Hazuki is one of the world's foremost experts on low poly food. From potato chips to caramel bars to squid legs, this man loves a snack. The game really leans into the whole life sim realism thing too, by showing Ryo picking up objects and drinking cans in real time a la Blue Stinger or D2. I realised that just doing all this stuff in a menu would be a lot more efficient, but I also think it would lose some of the charm. And we could talk all day about the choice locales like the Tomato Convenience Store, Bob's Pizzeria and the many little ramen shops, but what's a locale without the locals, am I right? Yokosuka is absolutely chock full of some of the most lovable and unhinged individuals this side of Twin Peaks. Ryo himself is quite a character obviously with his constant barrage of questions, but the townsfolk here are just as eccentric and hilarious. Tom dancing at the hot dog stand, the kid asking me if I want to play soccer, people constantly telling me that they are really tired, and Santa Claus coming up to me in the street to promote local businesses.
Tatsuya. Why so down?
I think a good one is ready to come out of this capsule toy machine. Do please give me 100 yen.
You're always saying that. Sorry, I'm in a hurry.
Aw, man!
Every interaction in Shenmue is pretty bizarre and the dialogue is infamously silly, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm not going to go so far as to claim that the uncanny dialogue was intentional, I don't think it was, but I'd say it's a happy accident. If the script and the voice acting had all been very polished, I think it would have made the game a little bit less memorable to me. Not to mention that the NPC dialogue is updated over the course of the game with pretty admirable frequency. Ryo, as we know, asks a hell of a lot of questions. And because we have sort of an open world here where you can conceivably talk to everybody, more or less every NPC has to have an individual answer for him. A lot of the time the information that they're going to tell you will mirror what somebody else has said, but still, the decision to have each voice actor give an individual response to basically the whole script is absolutely wild, and just another reason that I love this game. Yu Suzuki knew I wasn't just going to blast through the main quest. He knew I was going to spend a lot of time pissing about in shops and bars, and he was prepared for me. He had that dialogue all ready to go. But when you're not pissing about and hassling the townspeople, you will in fact be doing the main quest, some of which still involves pissing about and hassling the townspeople. But then there are also puzzles and item hunts and being in the right place at the right time, and of course we do ultimately get into some fighting, but we'll come to that later. The biggest thing I would say to anybody looking to try Shenmue if they're not familiar with it is that it's hardcore about being casual. That's a detail that I truly enjoy, but you really have to be ready to meet it on its own terms. You ain't speedrunning this one. If Ryo has to wait 4 hours for a bar to open, guess what? You've got 4 hours to kill. If Ryo is working a 9 to 5 over at the docks moving boxes with his trusty forklift, guess what you're going to be doing from 9 to 5? There's an argument to be made that the game could have used an editor for these moments, but I have to admit it certainly makes for an immersive experience. Yu Suzuki and the team put so much care into lovingly crafting hidden details everywhere, time-sensitive events, weather that is calendar accurate to each day we spend in Yokosuka in 1986. It's no wonder that they designed the game to be a little slower paced so we could take all of that in.
Maybe I should get another. I know this.
When it comes to martial arts in Shenmue, it's more of a theme than an activity. There is a lot of time spent in dojos and talking to wise old masters and such, but only a very small percentage of the game actually involves fighting people, and most of that happens in Disc 3. When the fights do come, however, it's all very satisfying and intuitive because the combat here uses a modified version of the Virtua Fighter engine, so if you're familiar with that series then you're going to know what to expect. Lots of fast fluid combos, tactical thinking, blocking, countering, etc, big impactful throws. Essentially it feels all very deliberate and realistic. Can take a little bit of getting used to, mind you. Oftentimes in the game you're thrown into fights without any prior warning, and most of these encounters involve taking on several dudes at once. So if you're coming into this without any prior knowledge, I can see how that would be a little bit jarring and take some getting used to. Upon replaying the game this year, I found myself approaching it with a bit of a different strategy, using a lot of parries and counters. Modern games like Sifu et al. Encourage that sort of thing, but when I played Shenmue as a kid, I was a lot more focused on just quick punches and kicks and maybe dodging out the way now and again. So when I came back to it with an open mind looking to really experiment and explore everything the combat system has to offer, I found that it really opened up. I was getting all these crazy counters and parries and throws that I'd never seen as a kid. The game doesn't do an amazing job of explaining all these things to you, so you really have to work them out for yourself, and I feel that that's just yet another misunderstood element in a game that was way ahead of its time. Ryo also needs to practice frequently since he's looking to take on gangsters and martial arts experts whilst he himself is just a high school student. Thankfully, there's plenty of opportunity to jump into an empty car park and get sweaty. Now this is kind of a neat system, I think. You can pull up your move list at any time during practice, and it'll also show you a meter indicating how much you have mastered each move. You raise this meter by successfully inputting move commands in practice, and the higher your level of mastery, the more effective it will be when you come to using it on a real life bad guy. You can even hotkey moves if you don't feel like wrangling with complicated inputs when shit gets heated. Our boy knows a decent range of maneuvers at the start of the game, seeing as how his dad was a sensei and trained him up all good like, but you will also get new moves as you go, both by buying scrolls in the antique shop and also by being taught certain techniques by characters in the world. This might only be a small touch, but I really do love how learning moves in the game feels realistic. Characters never break the fourth wall by just saying stuff like, press forward and then A and B. Instead, they'll say something like, shift your weight forward and exert force with your arms and legs at the same time. And then you get put into a practice mode and you gotta figure out what they mean. So if they tell you to shift your weight forward, we can take a fair guess that means we need to press forward, and then the arms and legs at the same time thing just means to press the punch and kick button at the same time. Once you nail the move, the character will let you know and then it gets added into your repertoire. As before, it is not the most efficient system. It would of course be more user friendly to just outright tell you the button prompts. But to me, this approach really made me feel like I was a martial arts student trying to get to grips with advanced techniques and work out how to pull them off. Shit's tight. And all of this leads us to the big 70-man battle at the end of the game. You're not on your own in this one, you do have your mate / bodyguard Guizhang backing you up, but it can still be very intimidating when you look at your VMU showing you've beaten 50 people and they're still coming. The combat system is also slightly modified for this fight since we have a much bigger arena to deal with. Normally, Ryo remains in his fighting stance and shifts back and forth like in Virtua Fighter or any other 3D fighting game. But here, he will break stance when he's out of range of the bad guys, allowing him to walk and run more freely, like in Spike Out or Rent a Hero number 1. It's only a little change, but it makes it feel like a totally different mode of fighting. This big showdown here is one of the most enjoyable parts of the game, and it really shows us how far Ryo's come. In the first disc, brawling with a couple of drunk sailors was a challenge, but now we're here kicking the shit out of scores of hardened gangsters. The decision to push most of the fighting back to disc 3 was bold, but I do think it shows a lot of restraint, and it demonstrates how Ryo gradually becomes a true Chad. Sadly, after all of our effort, we don't get the big showdown with Landy that we hoped for, as it ends on what is now a pretty infamous cliffhanger.
I'll never tell you where Ryo-san is! Fukusan! Landy! Ryo-san, don't do it!
I heard there's another mirror.
What?
Give it to me, now.
Not a chance.
If that's the way you want it, I'll just take it from you.
I will avenge my father's death.
What a wild ending, I still can't believe they did that. Oh, but we can't wrap up our talk on the fighting system without looking at Shenmue's most beloved mechanic of all, QTEs. Yep, love 'em or hate 'em, quick time events started right here. Or possibly in Sword of the Berserk, since that also had them and it released in the same year, but I'm definitely going to say that Shenmue popularised them. And somehow, they are still with us to this very day. Generally, the action sequences that you're witnessing during these QTE sections are very well choreographed, and so it would be nice to just sit back and watch them rather than being on the edge of your seat waiting to throw in some fast button punching action. But I will say, it definitely gets the adrenaline pumping. For what it's worth, I don't think Shenmue's approach to this is quite as egregious as some of the stuff that we'd see in Resident Evil 4 for instance. For one thing, you never get a hard game over out of this, you just have to do the sequence again. Although occasionally, if you fail a QTE, the story will progress anyway and you'll miss out on a scene, which is a little bit annoying. We could blow through now and just get straight into some final thoughts, but we're not done here just yet. I think it's high time we take a look at some exclusive extra content, by way of that Japanese preview disc simply entitled, What's Shenmue? Essentially, this is a playable teaser. I'm sorry, this is really embarrassing. Right in the middle of my video. Honestly, you try and run a reputable YouTube channel.
Hello.
Can I help you?
Any sailors ever come here?
What's Shenmue is a playable teaser for the main game. Unlike a traditional demo, but very much like Sega in the 90s, everything on this disc is completely unique and separate from the main game, so it's still worth playing even if you've already played Shenmue. Originally, this was only ever released in Japan as a sort of pre-order bonus to hold fans over because the production of the game was a little bit delayed. But thanks to the team at Shenmue Dojo, we now have a working English patch so even non-Japanese fans can enjoy it. The premise in this thing is that Ryo needs to find Hidekazu Yukawa, then managing director of Sega and sort of a mascot for the Dreamcast in Japan, thanks to a series of very funny TV adverts he did for the console. We start off here with Ryo's journal telling us that we need to find Yukawa and protect him because he's transporting a valuable Dreamcast disc that somebody is trying to steal. Ryo starts things off by talking to Tom at the hot dog stand and then they make a plan together. Interestingly, Tom doesn't have his normal hot dog shirt on here and instead he has a cool skeleton fit. Once we take control of Ryo, things feel very familiar. We're trundling around town, chatting to folks, except now Ryo can also crouch. It's a cool little detail and it would have been nice to see in the main game for when we're investigating stuff on the ground, but I guess it was probably taken out of the demo due to limitations around button mapping. In the demo, the button for crouch is the one that we use to look at our journal in the main game. After a little QTE fight with some resident Bancho boys, we can find Yukawa coming out of the Asia Travel Company, and then he runs off so we chase him over to the game U.
湯川だな。必ず来ると思ってたぜ。
しまった。
さあ、ディスクを渡してもらおうか。
この人に手を出すな。
なんだてめえ！
After saving Yukawa, it turns out that this whole thing was just a dream, and we see the dude back in his office with all his unsold Dreamcasts. He looks up to a poster of Shenmue and it fills him with determination. So, after all that, does Shenmue hold up? I'm gonna say that it absolutely does, but I want to throw in a few caveats. It may not surprise you to learn that I love the Dreamcast, and so I have a lot of nostalgia for this game. That said, I'm not blinded by my rose-tinted glasses, and I can see the flaws here that would make it very frustrating for some, especially in the pacing. But that said, none of these flaws are a result of the game's age. It was just as esoteric when it dropped nearly 25 years ago now. And the control scheme felt weird back then just as it does now. Well, on the Dreamcast at least. I haven't played the HD remaster yet. But all the stuff I loved about it then still hits just as hard now. The moseying and noseying, chatting to folks, buying toys and snacks, feeding the kitten. You really get out of Shenmue what you put into it, and nowhere is that more apparent than the combat system. The fighting always felt snappy and fluid and responsive, but I would say for me it felt even better coming back to it now with a more inquisitive mind. Like I say, as a kid I was happy to just sort of kick and punch my way through fights, but this time I really wanted to try and understand the mechanics and the timing of things, experimenting with different throws and countering as much as I could. When I got into that headspace, the action really started to flow like a good martial arts movie, and it was fun to watch as well as play. I could go on all day folks, but suffice it to say that Shenmue is a flawed classic, a landmark title that changed the shape of gaming in many ways and opened the door for other open world series like Yakuza and such. This definitely won't be the last time I pay a visit to Yokosuka, but before I do I should really check out Shenmue 2 and 3. Thanks for watching as always folks. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment. If you're feeling extra generous, you could even take a look at that there Patreon. And until next time, I'm not going to answer that.